It's not every day that you get a second chance at love. My story began a few years ago, on a balmy summer evening. My son, Jack, was playing in the park, laughing as he chased after a butterfly, his golden hair gleaming in the sunlight. I sat on a bench nearby, a book in hand, occasionally glancing up to ensure he was safe. That's when I first met Mark. "Your son?" he had asked, nodding towards Jack's direction as he took a seat next to me. "Yes, that's Jack," I replied, smiling warmly. Mark introduced himself and we struck up a conversation, talking about everything from our favorite books to our hopes and dreams. As the sun set, casting a rosy glow on the horizon, I realized we'd been talking for hours. There was an instant connection, a pull I hadn't felt in a long time. Weeks turned into months, and our relationship blossomed. Mark was different. He was kind, understanding, and most importantly, he adored Jack. One evening, as we strolled along the beach, Mark got down on one knee. "Emily," he began, his eyes filled with sincerity, "I love you and Jack. I want us to be a family. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I whispered, "Yes." The wedding preparations commenced with great enthusiasm. Friends and family came together, excited about the upcoming nuptials. My best friend, Clara, was my rock during this time. "I'm so happy for you," Claire had said one afternoon as we flipped through bridal magazines. "After everything you've been through, you deserve this." "I know," I replied, sighing contentedly. "It feels like a dream." Our wedding was to be a simple, intimate affair surrounded by close friends and family. Jack, in his little tuxedo, was excited to be the ring bearer. The day approached with a mix of anticipation and nerves. Little did I know that the wedding day would be the beginning of a series of events that would change my life forever. The wedding day dawned, bright and clear. It was the kind of day you read about in fairy tales, where the sun smiles just a bit more warmly, and the birds sing a touch more melodiously. Jack was up early, excitedly running around in his tuxedo, practicing his role as the ring bearer. I was in the bride's room, surrounded by a flurry of activity. Clara was there, helping me with my gown, ensuring every detail was perfect. As she fastened the last pearl button, she looked into my eyes, her own sparkling with tears. "You look stunning, Em," she whispered, embracing me. "Thank you," I replied, taking a deep breath to calm my nerves. "I just wish Mark would have come to see me this morning. I've barely heard from him." She hesitated before replying. "He's probably just nervous. Big day for him too, you know." The ceremony was to be held in the gardens of my childhood home. Guests had begun to take their seats, the soft notes of a violin filling the air. Clara and I peeked from behind the curtains. Everyone was there, eagerly awaiting the union, but something felt off. Mark stood at the altar, looking dapper in his suit. However, instead of the usual twinkle in his eyes, there was a vacant look, an aloofness I hadn't seen before. He seemed lost in thought, barely acknowledging the guests. As the bridal march began, I took my first steps down the aisle. Our eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow of doubt in Mark's gaze. But as I reached him, he took my hands and we turned to face the officiant. The ceremony was a blur, but amidst the vows and blessings, there was an unmistakable tension. When it was time for the ring exchange, Mark's hands trembled. I whispered, trying to reassure him, "It's okay, love." He forced a smile, his voice barely above a whisper as he responded, "Just nerves. Just nerves." The ceremony concluded, and as we walked down the aisle as husband and wife, the cheers and applause of our loved ones echoed around us. But in the midst of all the joy and celebration, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had changed. The festivities continued into the night, but Mark's distant demeanor persisted. Every attempt I made to draw him out was met with polite but curt responses. That evening, As the last of the guests departed and silence enveloped the house, I found myself wondering if the fairy tale had ended before it had even truly begun. The weeks following our wedding were a whirlwind. We were busy settling into our roles as newlyweds, while I was juggling the responsibilities of work and motherhood. We moved into my old house, a cozy two-story building that echoed with memories of my life before Mark. Jack was elated about the move. "Is this where I get my own room?" he'd asked, wide-eyed and full of wonder. Mark knelt down, ruffling Jack's hair. "Of course, buddy. You get the best room in the house." Despite Mark's distant behavior during the wedding, he seemed to be making an effort now. He often played with Jack, and they quickly forged a bond. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Mark struggled to find a job. He'd often be holed up in our home office, scanning job portals and sending out resumes. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Mark walked into the kitchen, a dejected look on his face. "No luck today?" I inquired gently, hoping not to exacerbate his evident frustration. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I had an interview. It seemed promising, but they said they'd gone with someone with more experience." I reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "It's okay. We'll manage. I believe in you." He nodded, pulling me into a tight embrace. "Thank you. It's just, I want to provide for you and Jack. I don't want you to bear all the burden." Days turned into weeks, with the same routine. Mark's initial optimism waned, replaced by a growing sense of despondency. I tried my best to lift his spirits, organizing family outings or intimate date nights at home. But the weight of unemployment was taking its toll on him. One particularly challenging evening, after receiving yet another rejection email, Mark emerged from the office with a defeated slump in his shoulders. I tried to console him, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. "It's just a phase," I said, holding his face in my hands. "Every storm passes. We're in this together." He looked deep into my eyes, his gaze filled with gratitude and an underlying sadness. "I hope so. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy. Jack's laughter and innocence often lightened the mood, reminding us of the simple pleasures of life. But as the days passed, the financial strain began to loom large, casting a shadow over our newly formed family unit. Little did I know that the storm was about to intensify, testing the very foundation of our relationship. As days melted into months, our life seemed to be stuck in a repetitive loop. The mornings began with Mark's fervent job hunting, and the evenings were a mix of silence, frustration, and an ever-growing distance between us. I could feel the strain, not just financially but emotionally as well. The first time I saw the bottle, it was on a Friday evening. I had come home after a long day at work, hoping for some respite. Mark was on the couch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him, the TV playing some old sitcom to a seemingly indifferent audience. "Mark," I ventured, a mix of concern and disbelief in my voice. "What's going on?" He looked up, his eyes slightly glazed. "I thought it might help, just to take the edge off." "Take the edge off?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Since when do you drink alone?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I just needed something, The frequency of these evening drinking sessions started to increase. More often than not, when I returned home, I'd find Mark intoxicated. Conversations turned into confrontations. The house, once filled with laughter and love, became a battleground. One evening, as I tried to confront him about his increasing dependency, he exploded. "You don't understand, Emily. Every single day, every rejection, every damn time someone looks at me with pity, it's like a dagger to my heart." I took a deep breath. "We promised to be there for each other, Mark. Drowning your sorrows isn't the solution." He looked away, the pain evident in his eyes. "Sometimes it feels like the only solution." Jack, sensitive to the changing dynamics, started retreating into his world. He'd spend more time in his room, drawing or reading, trying to drown out the harsh reality outside. One particularly harrowing evening, Mark came home later than usual, stumbling through the door, reeking of alcohol. Jack, curious about the commotion, peered out from his room. Seeing his father in that state, his innocent eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Why is Daddy acting funny, Mommy?" he whispered. Holding back tears, I hugged him close. "It's okay, Jack. Daddy's just not feeling well." The descent was rapid from there. Arguments became a regular occurrence. Promises of sobriety were made and broken. The man I had married, the one who had promised a future filled with love and understanding, seemed to be fading away, replaced by this tormented shadow. And then came that fateful night, the culmination of all our pent-up frustrations and pain. It was the turning point, the beginning of the end of our fairy tale. The snow had started to fall, casting a blanket of white over our once happy home. The chill in the air was nothing compared to the icy atmosphere inside. Mark had been particularly agitated that day. His drinking had begun early, and by evening he was far from sober. It started with a misplaced toy, one of Jack's action figures. Mark tripped over it, sending him into a fit of rage. The yelling began, words slurred but filled with venom. Jack, frightened, ran to his room, but not before Mark, in his drunken stupor, locked the door from the outside. "Out!" he screamed, pointing towards the garden. "Maybe some cold air will cool your head, Emily." I was in shock, the biting cold seeping through my clothes as I found myself outside. Tears stung my eyes, more from the humiliation than the cold. That's when I saw him, Mr. Thompson, our next-door neighbor. A kind, elderly gentleman who had always greeted us with a warm smile. He was out clearing his walkway. Noticing me shivering and distraught, he approached with concern, evident in his eyes. "Emily, is everything all right?" he asked, wrapping a warm scarf around me. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out, the reality of my situation too overwhelming. He guided me to his porch, offering a comforting presence. Taking a deep breath, I recounted the events leading up to that moment. Mr. Thompson listened, nodding occasionally, his expression a mix of sympathy and anger. "You shouldn't be treated this way," he said firmly, "especially not with young Jack in the house." I wiped away my tears, nodding. "I don't know what's gotten into him, Mr. Thompson. This isn't the Mark I knew." He pondered for a moment before saying, "Come inside, have some tea, and warm up. I might have something that could help." Curious, I followed him in. His living room was cozy, the walls adorned with pictures of his family. He pointed to a camera setup by his window. "I've been having security issues lately. Installed these cameras. They have a view of your garden and entrance. Might have caught Mark's actions." Hope surged within me. "Do you think we could check?" He nodded, leading me to a monitor. The footage was clear. There was Mark forcibly pushing me out and locking the door behind me. The evidence was undeniable. "You should go to the police," Mr. Thompson advised. "No one deserves to be treated this way." As gratitude welled up, I realized that in this darkest hour, I had found an unexpected ally. It was the ray of hope I desperately needed, and I was determined to act upon it. The following morning, the sun cast a gentle glow, contrasting sharply with the turmoil I felt inside. Armed with the evidence from Mr. Thompson's security cameras, I made my way to the local police station, my heart pounding in my chest. The station was bustling, but a kind officer named Detective Martinez took an interest in my case. I recounted the events, my voice trembling, showing him the footage that Mr. Thompson had provided. His face hardened as he watched. "Ma'am," he began, leaning forward, "domestic violence is a serious matter. We won't take this lightly." "But what if he retaliates?" I whispered, thinking of Jack and the danger Mark might pose. "We'll ensure your safety," he assured, his voice firm. "You've taken the first step by coming here. We'll handle it from here." It was only a few hours later when Mark returned home. The alcohol from the previous night had worn off, and the weight of his actions seemed to be hitting him. I was there, waiting with Detective Martinez and another officer. The look on Mark's face when he saw the police was one of sheer shock. "What's going on, Em?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. Detective Martinez stepped forward, his tone authoritative. "Mr. Collins, we have evidence of your abusive actions towards your wife. You need to come with us." Mark's face turned white. Please," he pleaded, tears forming in his eyes. "I'm so sorry." But Detective Martinez interrupted. "Save it for the station." The trial was a blur. Mr. Thompson was called as a key witness, his evidence irrefutable. Mark's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a man under immense stress, turning to alcohol as a crutch. But the jury wasn't swayed. Mark was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison. As the gavel came down, a mix of emotions coursed through me. There was relief, of course, but also a profound sadness for the love lost and the dream that had turned into a nightmare. Detective Martinez approached me after the trial, offering a small smile. "Justice has been served, Mrs. Collins. I hope you and Jack can find peace now." With a nod of gratitude, I replied, "It's been a long journey, Detective. But with people like you and Mr. Thompson, I know we'll be okay." And as I stepped out of the courtroom holding Jack's hand tightly, I felt a weight lifting. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was filled with hope. The weeks following the trial were surreal. The house, which had once felt like a prison, now stood as a testament to resilience and new beginnings. The lingering shadows of Mark's presence gradually began to fade, replaced with a sense of tranquility. Jack, my brave little boy, started to come out of his shell. The nightmares that had haunted him began to recede, and in their place emerged a vibrant, cheerful child full of life. We began attending therapy, a place where he could voice his fears, and together we began the process of healing. One day, as we sat on the porch, enjoying the warmth of the sun, Jack looked up at me, his big eyes reflecting a depth of understanding far beyond his years. "Mommy," he began hesitantly, "is Daddy a bad man?" It was a question I had dreaded, unsure of how to respond. Taking a deep breath, I replied, "Your daddy made some very bad choices, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean we should hate him. It means we should hate him. It means we should hope he learns from his mistakes." Jack seemed to ponder this, curling into my side. "I just want us to be happy," he murmured. "And we will be," I whispered back, hugging him close. As the days turned into weeks and weeks and weeks into months, life started to take on a new rhythm. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had abandoned, and reveled in the simple joys of life. Our home echoed with laughter, music, and the unmistakable sounds of happiness. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, there was a knock on the door. To my surprise, it was Mr. Thompson holding a basket full of fresh vegetables from his garden. "Thought you might like these," he said with a warm smile. I laughed, accepting the basket. "You spoil us, Mr. Thompson." He chuckled, a twinkle in his eye, "Just looking out for my favorite neighbors." We stood there for a moment, two souls bound by circumstance and gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "for everything." He nodded, understanding the depth of my gratitude. Sometimes life throws curveballs. It's how we respond